Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Brad Dore. Brad is the Vice President of Global Marketing in the energy space. Brad, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. My name is Brad Dore. I'm the Vice President of International Marketing for EnerVenue. We're a differentiated energy storage company. And at EnerVenue, I'm responsible for marketing and communication activities across the company's vertical markets. Been in the renewable industry for in excess of 15 years between this and the solar industry. And so really excited to talk to you today about the energy transition and, a little bit about, kind of the topics you're discussing in terms of career development.
Thank you. So how did you get into marketing then?
Well, so my degree originally is in public relations. And so I started out scholastically in the communication space, quickly pivoted though to sales. I graduated college right kind of at the tail end of the .com burst. And found it difficult to kind of get into my chosen career path. So I was diverted to a sales capacity for a number of years. And eventually, fast forward a few years, the Great Recession hit and kind of I found an opportunity to transition away from sales and get back into marketing. So I started working for a marketing agency in California, working for a boutique marketing agency. And, that was kind of the initial start of my marketing career. In the agency world.
Okay, excellent. So did you find it hard to transition away through, did you find it hard to transition in your career?
So I'll be the first to admit, anytime you're working with a career transition, there's a little bit of luck involved. There's a little bit of hard work and there's a little bit of luck. And I think I've been really fortunate in kind of those transition points in my career. So, for example, when I was working at that boutique agency at the time, one of our clients was SMA America, which is the U.S. arm of SMA Solar Technology, and that was one of the clients I managed. Now, this is just at the start of the 2008 recession. Agency was forced to reduce its headcount due to the downturn and the loss of client contracts. But fortunately, just a couple of weeks prior to that, SMA had posted an opening for an in-house position, and so it was a natural transition for me to. And really the best thing that ever happened in terms of my career that got me into the renewable space. And I've always been passionate about renewable energy. I've always been passionate about the environment. So it was really, kind of the confluence of factors that the opportunity to kind of get into that space and then grow. One of the things you kind of look for as you transition and throughout stops in your careers is transitioning into spaces that allow you personal growth and career growth. And, during the 2008 recession, there were very few markets and industries that can continue to grow, but solar was one of them. And so that was really, really a fortunate step in my career. And I've always been aware that there was a little bit of luck involved there, but also, just a good opportunity to grow with a company that I spent, the better part of a decade with.
Okay. It's interesting that you say that you got maybe a particular job due to luck. Do you really think that? Do you not think it's just because maybe you're really good at your job and people recognize that?
Well, there's a couple things here. Luck is really when preparation meets opportunity, right? The opportunity is there, but you have to capitalize on it. And so, what you do throughout your career is to prepare yourself for whatever your next opportunity is. And so, if you're at the first stop in your career or the second stop, you should be preparing for what comes next. So you're always trying to build a skill set. You're always trying to build a network of relationships that will help enable you to reach kind of the next goal in your career path.
Okay, but then how do you prepare yourself for for your next maybe step up in 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 a senior position?
One thing that I've always looked for was seeking out mentors. At every stop that you have in your career, you're going to have an opportunity to work with good people. Seek out people that are admired, find out what makes them tick, what makes them good at what they do, and try and emulate those things. You're trying to take kind of the best lessons you can from mentors throughout your career. And so I've applied numerous lessons that I've learned, from a number of professionals. My first manager at SMA used to talk about how he can't grow people in the shade. And that meant, he really sought opportunities for others to push them out into the light. And, doing something new can be scary. We often have self-doubt, but finding a manager or a mentor that will help empower you makes a big difference. And I've tried to do that with, people that I've had in terms of my team in my career, that I've tried to, provide opportunities for folks that have worked on my teams as well. Another lesson that I've learned from, my career in terms of working with different people is the value of alignment. I used to think it just got in the way of me doing my job, but I had somebody that I really admire communicated the value of alignment in terms of making progress, and it just kind of clicked. And you start to kind of pick up these lessons from mentors, either at different areas within a company or at different employers, and you start to employ those lessons in your career, and it helps you kind of develop a roadmap for where you want to go next. So I always tell folks, as when somebody joins my team, or we're building towards a goal, one of the goals isn't just how do we make the company succeed, but it's how do we all succeed together. And part of that, it really comes back to employee development and making sure that you're providing opportunities for folks to enhance and develop their skills. You're empowering them, which includes giving latitude to make some mistakes. And so anyway, like I said, as you perform in your current job, you should always be preparing for what's next in terms of building a skill set, or finding mentors and learning lessons, or challenging yourself with something new to kind of take you to that next level.
I was going to go back to something really interesting that you were saying about roadmaps. Is it important for you to have your own roadmap?
So I think it's important for you to have goals. I think, roadmaps, you know, goals are important. Knowing where you want to go and what you want to do is definitely important, but don't let that get in the way of capitalizing on current opportunities. Right? I think we make the mistake sometimes of looking for, I'm at this stage in my career, or I'm at this age and I need to be doing this, or I need to be doing that. What you should be really looking for is, how do you make yourself better at what you do? How do you grow your network? And when those opportunities arrive, are you ready to capitalize on them?
Okay, but that's interesting in itself. So how do you make yourself better at what you do?
There's a couple things you can do there. One is, I've done a lot of coaching in my background in terms of youth sports, and you talk about, one of the favorite things that coaches have about certain players is that they're coachable. And that's, in a professional business setting, that's be open to feedback, be open to learning. You don't know it all. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I learn something new literally every day. And it might be something that contradicts something that I've done 5 years ago, right? It might be that the market has changed and I need to adapt with it, or it's a new skill set that's now important. It might be learning some new platform that becomes important. So having an open mind, and having a mindset that, learning is just a constant process, and being open to that feedback and being open to learning and applying those lessons in your next project, is really important. Especially as you get older in your career, you find a lot of people sometimes get set in, this is what we did, this is how we did this project 2 years ago, or I did this project before, but what was right then might not be what's right now. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to be flexible in your thinking, and really challenging yourself to look at something with a fresh lens, becomes really important.
I do agree with that as well. But how do you know I was going to ask you a couple of questions actually, but how do you know when you're ready to capitalize on a particular opportunity that's right
You
in your
don't.
face?
You don't. I can tell you, you will almost invariably feel unprepared for every new opportunity because it just as human beings, we have self-doubt, right?
Mhm.
Am I good enough? Can I do it? Do I have the skill set? If you wait until you're fully prepared, then you're never going to progress. I mean, the number of projects that I've completed or the number of roles that I've done where I was, underqualified to begin with.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's countless, right? The learning process really, that's part of developing a career is you're going to do things that are a little scary because you don't know how to do them. But, it's less important, it's less important to know exactly how to do something and far more important to have the attitude that you're going to figure out how to do it. Right. The give me somebody who says, I'm not sure how to do it, but I'll figure it out. And, that person's going to be successful in their career. That's the type of attitude that's needed.
Okay, but that's really wise words because not everybody knows everything. That's a given. But having to work through it and proving that you can learn and move forward with a particular problem, that is really important as well. So isn't it?
Absolutely. If we waited until we knew how to do everything, we wouldn't do anything. That's part of being a lifelong learner, and that's part of folks who embrace challenges are really embracing something new. Why is something a challenge, right? It's because you may not have the experience doing it before. You may not have all of the resources to get it done. You may need some support, right? There's lots of things that can make a task or a new career stop or a new role challenging. And the attitude to figure out, what do I need to learn? Who do I need to learn from? How do I need to engage with this task becomes really, really important. And that's something that you can apply across industries, you can apply across jobs. If you just have that mindset and that ability to figure it out, it's going to make a huge difference in your career.
I think so too. So, what would your advice to young graduates when they think that when they come out of university that they maybe not need to continue studying and learning?
Yeah. So, you know, there's no substitute for real work experience. And by that, I mean, we students spend so much time focusing on university or focusing on college, getting into the right one, studying the right thing. This really comes at the detriment of their mental health. And while it's important, what's more important is the actual work. So internships, a young professional will learn more in his or her chosen path in a few weeks of doing actual work through an internship than in 4 years of college. It's one thing to learn about communication concepts, for example. It's another thing to be asked to actually develop messaging for a business. That's where you're challenged, right? You don't learn about managing expectations or relationships necessarily in the classroom. You don't learn about working within the confines of a budget. These are things that you get, very clearly when you enter the workforce. And so that practical experience is really critical to early performance. It gives somebody an initial leg up in terms of differentiating themselves for those initial positions. And as an employer, I love working with interns as well. It's an opportunity to teach. It can be a fantastic resource. So somebody who's new from university, who's recently graduated, really, really look for those internships to both build your skill set, to differentiate your resume or your personal brand, and to start developing professional relationships.
I agree, actually, but internships are really hard to come by nowadays.
hmm
What would your advice be to actually finding one?
I think it's important as you're looking for internships or you're looking for any new position to try to differentiate yourself. Right? You want to be memorable, and not memorable in a I don't know, in a cheesy way, but memorable in a way that kind of sets you apart as a professional. So, you know, having a variety of skills that you can draw upon, or having, skills that may be in demand with an employer as you're looking for internships, that will help you secure them. In terms of finding them, one of the things I'd recommend is networking. There's a number of networking groups for young professionals that you can join. Again, talking about finding a mentor, there may be opportunities within your community to get involved with the Chamber of Commerce or with other business networking groups to kind of grow your opportunities. You're not going to secure every opportunity that comes along. So again, building the widest possible network that you can in order to create more opportunities for yourself in the future becomes important. So, look for those opportunities to get involved, whether it's through your university or, through a professional networking group to meet others and kind of expand your social network.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with all that as well. So, do you think it's important for anybody that's working to have a 5 year plan?
What is a 5 year plan? I think it's important to have an idea of where you're at and where you want to go, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I think, less, I think you need to be focused less on kind of titles in that 5 year plan and more setting objectives to learn skills or setting objectives to build a professional network. Those are things that are going to make a bigger difference. If I set out and say, look, I want to be, a senior manager, or I want to be a VP, or I want to be a chief something, there's it's, to me, it's far more important to really say, what skills are going to get me to where I want to go, rather than, what title do I want to achieve? Do I need to manage a team? Do I need to have certain technical skills? And then, you're kind of building that skill set and setting objectives for, engaging with a network of professionals. Have I maintained contact with mentors? Have I, when was the last time I talked to so-and-so from, 5 years ago that was a great resource, and making sure that you're maintaining your network. Because I think those two things are going to make a bigger difference with your career growth than just arbitrarily putting a roadmap up saying, hey, in 5 years, I want to be a manager. In 7 years, I want to be a senior manager. In 8 years, I want to be a director. I think it's far more important to understand, what are the skills you need to obtain in order to be marketable and in order to differentiate yourself, in order to create an opportunity for yourself wherever that next step goes.
I do agree. I think you need to be concentrating on skills rather than a job title. But there is a lot of people that are job title chasers.
No, that's not to denigrate or say that that's not worthwhile. Certainly, we all want better wage, better title, more respect, right? These are things we all kind of crave through advancing a career, and they're important. So you do need to look for those opportunities to develop your your professional resume. But how do you do that? You don't do that just simply by saying, I want to advance my career. You do that through actionable steps of building skills that make you different from other folks that are pursuing those same roles and openings. You do that by making connections and developing relationships with people who move on to other companies and can alert you to opportunities. You do that by, again, building a skill set and building a network to create opportunities for yourself.
Okay, but then networking, I think in everything is important.
Agreed.
So what is the best way to go about networking and making sure that if anybody leaves your company that they remember you?
Yeah, so that's, really taking an interest in others. So being good at what you do is important, but making sure you nurture and maintain genuine relationships is equally important. So the owner and head of that marketing agency that I work with gave her staff a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, right? It's a book that was written 90 years ago, but the lessons are timeless. Taking a genuine interest in others, being a good listener, admitting your mistakes, and giving credit to others, all of those things help create an individual that other people want to work with. And that's important as you progress through your career. People will come and go. at different employers. And the idea is to make lasting relationships that can help you navigate your career later. I've found that, the best opportunities come through personal connections and personal relationships. It's not through just submitting, applications online. It's through, hey, I worked with Michelle 10 years ago at, a particular firm, and she was fantastic. And I think she'd be a great person to fill a role at the company we're at. Let's bring her over, or vice versa. When Michelle goes somewhere else, she says, I worked with Brad 10 years ago. He was great. Let's bring him in. And so developing kind of that network and taking that genuine interest in others, I think makes a big difference. It's not a superficial interest in others. It's really understanding that, you really want to develop a relationship with, folks that you admire, and that'll help you again later in your career.
But that can be hard in itself because everybody's busy at work, though.
Sure. And it's more difficult as we migrate from an in-office setting to a virtual setting as well, right? It's much harder, I think, today for young professionals to build professional relationships with their coworkers. You might have, a staff that's spread out across the country or across the world that you have to develop relationships with. These aren't, it's not where, when I was younger, there might be an evening gathering after work, or a happy hour, or folks that get together, or there's opportunity in the break room to go meet and have a coffee. And, that kind of interpersonal relationship building is much harder to come by nowadays because so much of what we do is online and virtual, but it's still really important. And so you've got to find ways to do that. You've got to find ways to connect on a personal level, because ultimately, that's gonna create a genuine relationship.
Yeah, because there is a lot of people that still work from home or the work hybrid at
Yeah.
their work. Do you think it's doing them any good?
Define good. So I think there's efficiencies that you can't in some roles. I think there's efficiencies you can get with virtual work. There are certain roles that have always been virtual. When you look at a sales organization, if you're trying to cover a large territory, for example, the US or Europe, you're going to have people that have always been virtual. But what's changing is the roles that used to be centralized are now, can be done remotely. And, the advantage to that is you might be able to have better coverage in certain regions, or you might have a lower cost, less cost on real estate, or there's, certain advantages to savings from the company, but it comes at the sacrifice of maybe some interpersonal connections, some relationship building. I talked about alignment earlier. One of the things that becomes incredibly important in being effective at almost any role is building consensus and alignment within a team, and that can be harder to be. That can be more difficult virtually than in person. I will say though, with Zoom or Teams, or at least we're connecting with a face, and I think that makes a difference too. When you're working through projects with colleagues, or you're trying to develop relationships with colleagues, a lot of younger folks will turn their camera off, or leave their camera off. That's, you really need to connect personally with somebody, and so making sure you're present, making sure you're listening, making sure you're engaging. I think that becomes really important in a virtual environment.
I think so too. I think so too. Yeah, I think body language can have a big impact as well, especially when you're on a Zoom team meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a silly thing, but it makes a difference, and it makes a difference in how you're perceived. But you want to be engaged in a virtual call. So I've got 3 monitors in my office. I could be looking here. I could be looking here. I could be looking down at my phone. We really want to be engaged with who we're speaking with. And so just the simple, like just as you did right now, you smiled, right? Or I'll give a head nod. I understand what you're saying. These are these body language clues that become incredibly important. When I was in school or early in my career, I read somewhere that 80% of communication is done through body language. And so even in a virtual environment, maintaining that eye contact, or providing clues and signals that you're listening makes a difference. So, yeah, smile, use somebody's name, nod your head, show that you're engaged, and that helps you kind of in this environment make a connection.
I agree. I totally agree. Body language is a very important, I think, point, especially when you're virtual, or even just every day as well.
Yeah.
So I just wondered, what is the best thing about your current job?
As I mentioned, I work for a differentiated energy storage company, a company called EnerVenue. We make
Mm.
metal hydrogen batteries for stationary storage for grid scale commercial industrial applications. And I've been in renewable energy prior to EnerVenue. I worked for SMA America, the US arm of SMA Solar Technology, who primarily did inverters, but power conversion and solar technology. With both of those companies, you know, I'm not just building and selling a product. I'm building and selling something that makes the world a little bit better. I'm involved in the energy transition. So there's a greater purpose to what I'm doing. Anybody can sell widgets. You can go out and I'm not putting anybody down who sells widgets, right? But having a purpose beyond kind of your day to day, you definitely want to take an interest in kind of your trade, but then working for a company that, shares your values or has a common purpose, something that you value really makes a difference. And so finding companies that are involved in spaces that you're passionate about makes you more passionate about doing your job. And so if you're asking me what's exciting about EnerVenue, we've got a differentiated product. We've got something that's different from everybody else. It's got real advantages. It's safer. It's long lasting, and it's involved in this energy transition, getting renewable energy onto the grid. Which is going to mean cleaner air and a whole host of benefits in terms of climate that we really need to address.
I mean, that is excellent as well. What differentiates your product to your competitors?
So as I mentioned, safety. There's a couple things when you look at battery energy storage. The dominant technology today is lithium ion. As we're well aware, there are significant safety issues with lithium ion. Right? We've heard of large batteries catching fire or having thermal events. With the EnerVenue technology, it's not prone to those same type of thermal risks. There's no threat of thermal runaway, so it's magnitude safer than kind of the established technologies. In addition to kind of that safety advantage, there are characteristics around the battery that make it super long lasting. So it's capable up to of 30,000 cycles. And so if somebody doesn't know necessarily what that means, typical batteries, you'll get 6,000 to 8,000 cycles out of. So it's going to last a lot longer. So it's safer. It lasts a lot longer. And then the third thing there is it's really flexible. So it can be used in, 2-hour systems. It can be used in 12-hour systems. There's a lot of flexibility that it can be used with on the grid. So it's not something where, a utility company may come in and say, yeah, I've got a need for a 4-hour battery today, but looking at 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, I need a 7-hour battery and I need a 10-hour battery to basically take kind of that energy that's generated by solar during the middle of the day and shift it into the evening. We're capable of doing that. We're capable of cycling multiple times per day. And so we have these real advantages in terms of the battery chemistry. Best of all, the chemistry itself comes from NASA. So this technology was used in aerospace applications. It was developed in the 70s and used in the 70s and throughout the 80s. The International Space Station, the Hubble Space Telescope, the Mars rover, they all used this nickel hydrogen technology. And so we're just taking an established, well-proven technology and commercializing it for a terrestrial use. So there's less risk involved in terms of being a startup or a novel technology. We already have kind of this safety net of performance in hundreds of thousands of cycles where this core chemistry has been proven out. So there's a lot that differentiates us. EnerVenue was named by Time Magazine as a green company of the year in 2024 and 2025. So there's plenty of third parties that have recognized that differentiation Forbes called us a climate tech unicorn. So it's really exciting to work for a company that has that differentiation, which makes my job as a marketer much easier. But also, it is exciting because I know that with each battery we shift, that means, more renewables in the ground, less fossil fuel, less pollution. We're fighting climate change. We're doing all of these important social things with the battery as well.
I mean, that sounds interesting and quite exciting. Do you think that your product will make a difference to the energy transition to reach net zero?
I certainly hope so. That's the idea. I think renewable energy can take us so far, right? Wind and solar are great technologies. They're now cheaper than most fossil fuel technologies, but they do suffer from intermittency, right? The sun doesn't shine 24/7. The wind doesn't blow consistently all of the time. What do you need in order to bridge kind of that gap and mimic, a baseline generation? You need batteries, and you need lots of different types of batteries. You need batteries of short duration. You need batteries of long duration. And so what's exciting about kind of the battery market is I think we're at a point where, there's a lot of opportunity. We're going to see that market grow significantly over the next 10 years. And with the demand of energy that's out there from, whether it's the electrification of our grid and electric vehicles or energy demand driven by data centers and AI, I think there's just so much opportunity to contribute positively in this space. I've got no doubt that the EnerVenue is going to make a difference.
I think so too. So, where do you see your company's product moving forward in maybe the next 10 years?
So, as I mentioned, we're stationary storage. So we are really built for large applications that don't move. We're not going to be in mobile phones. We're not going to be in electric vehicles. We're really about stationary storage. So supporting utilities and independent power producers, supporting kind of those big grid scale applications of taking, that power that's generated in a utility scale power plant and a utility scale solar array and, energy shifting, time shifting that into the evening. So I think that's like one big use case you'll see. I think, the other use case you see that will be a significant player is in the commercial and industrial. So warehousing or industrial applications or, anywhere where you've got large energy demand or large energy consumers, and you need to, for example, reduce your peak demand, or you need to, reduce your demand charges. You can utilize battery technology. You mentioned data centers. The data centers are they've got a number of power demands that can utilize battery storage, and so there's all sorts of ways and kind of these large applications where our batteries can support that energy transition.
Okay. That sounds exciting. So I'm going to maybe wrap things up and ask you maybe one final question, but maybe probably more. What advice would you give to the younger generation coming into the marketing space?
Again, I think there's no substitute for real work experience. So as a young professional, seek out ways to get internships, seek out ways to, develop a network. And those two things are going to make a bigger difference than any credential or certificate or training program that you go through. Connecting with business leaders in your area through a networking group or other young professionals to kind of help build a network that you can grow with becomes incredibly important. And then again, once you get in and experience those internships, that real world experience then gives you a way to differentiate yourself as kind of you move forward.
I was going to ask you, and it's probably quite an important question that a lot of young graduates might want answered. When is the best time to start networking? Is it in your last year of university, or should you be
now?
From day one?
Now, the answer is now. You don't wait. The opportunity, when you have the opportunity or when you can develop an opportunity, that's the right time. I think a mistake that people make is waiting too long. As you mentioned earlier, internships can be hard to come by. It's not like you can just walk out and necessarily grab one. It might take you several tries. It may take you a year or 2 years to secure one, right? So if you wait until you're about to graduate and then you graduate and now you're, are you working? Are you, you're trying to get into the market, but you don't have the experience. It becomes a challenge. So, as soon as you express an interest in a major and think that this is the path you want to go, my next step would be, looking for internships and work with your school. I know, for example, where I went, we had an internship was a mandatory part of our course, our career curriculum. You had to take it to do an internship, and that fundamentally made a difference in my career. And so, working with your university, I think becomes important to try and find those opportunities, but don't wait. The time's now.
So, or I would say what we call summer placements is what you would call them in the UK. So they're quite important as well then.
Absolutely. And not knowing about the UK, not knowing exactly how that works, whether it's a summer internship, I've employed interns throughout the year, right? I mean, there are times where we've been able to have an internship position that runs, quarterly. So internships may not be, don't just think of them as a summer opportunity. There may be opportunities to intern, throughout the remainder of the year. And I think that becomes, again, if you can secure an internship, particularly early in your college career, it'll make a huge difference later on.
Okay. That's sound advice. Sound advice. And how do you know which internship is going to be right for you?
That's a tough one. I would say that, an internship is about getting in and getting that experience. So what's the right one? I don't know. What's the wrong one? To me, that they're all right. Get in and get that experience. And, if it's not right, it's an internship. It's not going to last forever. It's going to be something that you can learn from, right? Not every job that you've had in your career or every job that I've had in my career has been the same, but you've learned something from every role. So you can learn even from a bad experience that maybe, hey, this isn't what I want later in my career. And so I would just say, pursue them relentlessly and go get one and experience it, because there's no substitute for that experience.
I absolutely agree. Okay, I'm going to wind things up now. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Brad for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.